Well, if you're listening to this video, you've made it through our first month of class. So welcome to the start of the 5th week of the course. And I just want to make a couple comments. One being students get a handful of emails per week about various questions and comments related to the course and the course content, and I really like that feedback, and it seems like a good way to connect with you guys if you have specific questions about course content especially. And then the other thing is the course discussion questions, and just want to express a few reasons why it's really important to hit that deadline on Sunday night. One being, it's a deadline. That's when it's due. It's really important to develop that habit of getting things done on time and handed in when they're supposed to. Whether there's a grade attached to it or not, that's the deadline. The second reason is to be able to respond to other students in their discussions. It's important that they get that feedback in a timely manner too. And if you do get your questions in, the sooner the better, but you'll get more feedback from me, you'll get more feedback from other students, and that's going to be helpful ultimately to you. And then in terms of grade-wise, if you're just rushing to get your posts done, especially if you're running late and you're past the deadline, I might say, repost. Actually, I'm not going to say repost if you're past the deadline because I'm moved on to other weeks. The other students are moved on to other weeks. But if I say repost or ask you a question where I say, you need to repost and answer these questions, you're not going to get the points for that week if you're posting late and your posting isn't good enough. The majority of late postings are good enough, but and I'll still mention something in there that it wasn't. You're not going to be getting the points for that week. So just make sure you get those postings in on time. So to start this week, we're looking at Chapter 5 and Concepts, Operationalization, and Measurement. Researchers really need to do a good job of describing what they're measuring and how they're measuring it, because research can be very difficult and imprecise. We need to be able to communicate our ideas and findings to the audience. There are three basic categories that researchers measure. One is direct observation, which are the things and qualities that we can directly observe, such as social interactions, colors, shapes, things like that. Indirect observations, it requires indirect observations that can't be observed directly, for example, like reports, courts transcripts, things that we, criminal history records where we can dive into data. And then there's constructs, which are things that we can't directly or indirectly observe. It's pretty similar to a concept or a theory. So now I want to look at a few terms. Conceptualization. A conceptualization is specifying precisely what we mean when we use particular terms. So, and we're going to get to operational definitions, and this will be explained a little bit further. Dimensions. There are aspects of a concept that can be broken down. They're basically subdivided into dimensions, and crime seriousness can be a subdivision or a dimension of the concept of crime seriousness. And so we can look at first, second, third degree murder, involuntary and voluntary manslaughter as different dimensions of homicide. Where when we're looking at crime seriousness, we can look at petty misdemeanors, gross misdemeanors, and felony level offenses to gain a deeper understanding of dimensions, allow us to gain a deeper understanding of what we're studying. Concepts aren't tangible things. They're things that we can't taste, touch, or smell. Concepts are abstract and only in our own mind. Some examples of concepts is poverty. What exactly is poverty? Poverty is something that a term that we've made up in our own mind. It's when we start measuring poverty that it becomes a problem, because we need to specify what exactly is poverty. More to come on that. So when we look at concepts and conceptualization, we have to look at how do we define these things. So how do we define things that are basically in our minds? So we have to provide definitions to these concepts. So a conceptual definition is a working definition that is assigned to a certain term and helps us to provide focus for observations. For example, with the poverty, a conceptual definition of poverty might be substandard housing, it might be low income, it might be unemployment, homelessness, things like that. But if we're going to study homelessness or poverty, we need to, take that a step or two farther, and we have to look at how do we operationally define something. Or so an operational definition is how are we going to measure it. So how are we going to measure poverty? So we might measure poverty by income level. We might look at it just purely at income. So, for example, we might say in this study we define poverty as people making less than $15,000 a year for a one-person household, $20,000 for a two-person household, and so on. So we need to really, if we want to define something, we need to break it down and really look at what defines that concept. Okay, so let's operationally define anger. Anger might be hitting people, yelling at people, raising your voice, that type of thing. So we can define what anger is. So let's say that's our parameters for anger. But how do we measure anger? So we have to take measurements in the real world. So we operationally defined it. So every time a researcher might be observing and sees that target behavior, they count it. So defining measuring something is assigning numbers or labels to units of analysis in order to represent the conceptual properties. So that operational definition of anger in our example. So we're making observations and we're assigning scores to them. Our text identifies 4 levels of measurement, one being nominal, which offers names or labels for a characteristic, for example, race, gender, what town or state you live in. And then there's ordinal measurement, which attributes can be logically rank ordered. So education, we have kindergarten through grad school. Opinions, occupational status, you could be unemployed, employed, volunteering, there's a range there, so that's ordinal. Interval, meaning that there's a meaningful distance between attributes, temperature, IQ, things like that. And ratio, it has a 0 point, so age, 0 to, whatever, 115. Number of prior offenses, how long were you in prison or jail for, and what is your income. There's a lot of good research, there's a lot of bad research, and there's a lot of research that is misleading, purposely misleading. So we really want to focus on what makes research good, but we also want to learn about what makes something bad in terms of research, what makes something misleading in terms of research. In a lot of the discussion questions, I frequently talk about leave your emotions out of it, and the best way to leave your emotions out of it is to write in the third person. So don't say, I feel and things like that, because it starts showing that you have some bias for that, whatever you're discussing. But anyway, studies, there's a lot to studies. We talked about ethics, we've talked about validity, which is super important. And another term that we're going to talk about now is reliability. And reliability is how we go about being able to start generalizing our findings within research, or finding out that our research isn't generalizable to other populations and settings. Although there's no such thing as perfect reliability in a study, if there was, it would show a particular measurement technique repeatedly applied to that same person or object or people would yield the same result each time you transfer it to a different population or person or situation. But again, there's no such thing as perfect reliability, just like there's no such thing as perfect validity. So the problem is that you research something and you're not necessarily going to get the same results every time. And if you do, there's possibility that the validity is off. So reliability doesn't mean, it likely means that there's some phenomenon at play that is causing, or variables that are starting to formulate of the probability of something happening frequently, but it doesn't necessarily ensure that we're researching what we're setting out to research, and that's more of what validity looks at. So remember, really, really important that a researcher's bias and subjectivity and emotions and things like that can skew research. So if there's a really biased researcher researching something, and you take that same study by a less biased researcher, they may find a totally different result in a different situation. And that would show that there was a lack of reliability, at least on that first study. So the more studies there are around the same phenomena, the more valid it is, that study. Maybe that's not the right word, since validity in research talks a little bit about something else, but the better that research is. So there's a few ways in which we can see if our study is generating acceptable reliability. And one is the test-retest method, which is taking the same measurement more than once. So, for example, you give a person a psychological test, and then you give it to them again, and if their scores are way off, then it's not a very reliable test. But if they're scoring the same way every time, or both times, then it's more reliable. There's inter-rater reliability, so it's comparing the same measurements by different researchers. For example, there might be a data set generated by a certain study, and the researchers look at it, and then if another group of researchers see the same data, that is showing better reliability. And then there's a split-half method, which is taking, for example, if you're researching depression, you might look at it through different tests. You might use the PHQ-9, the Beck Depression Inventory, the MMPI, and so on. And if they're all showing, that the person's depressed or not depressed, and they're good measurements of finding that phenomenon, then we might find that it has better reliability. So that is the split-half method, where we're making more than one measurement of the same concept.